300 horsepower. In the world of grocery getters and daily drivers, that's a decent engine. But in the rarefied air of top field drag racing in the early 90s, 300 horsepower was just a margin of error. It was the difference between being a legend and being a footnote. And in 1992, one man found that massive chunk of power hiding in the absolute last place anyone thought to look. He didn't find it in the fuel mixture, he didn't find it in the aerodynamics, and he definitely didn't find it in the rulebook. He found it in the teeth of a pulley. This is legacy motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about the engineering loopholes that changed racing history. If you're someone who loves stories about mechanical geniuses outsmarting billion-dollar industries with nothing but a notebook and a lathe, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Let's rewind to the summer of 1992. The vibe in the pits of the NHRA is tense. You have to understand the context here. This was an era where the sport was hitting a physical wall. The cars were stuck. Everyone was running the same setup, the same blowers, the same fuel pumps, and they were all hitting the same ceiling. 2,200 horsepower was the magic number. It felt like the laws of physics had just put up a do not enter sign. You could throw more money at the engine, you could throw more nitro at it, but you just couldn't get the power to the ground. Now, most crew chiefs looked at this problem and saw a limitation of the engine blocks. They thought, okay, the metal just can't take anymore. But Dale Armstrong wasn't most crew chiefs. He was looking at something much simpler, something so boring that everyone else ignored it. He was looking at the rubber belt spinning the supercharger. Here's the thing about top fuel engines that is hard to wrap your head around. The supercharger, that giant air pump sitting on top of the engine, requires an insane amount of energy just to spin. We aren't talking about the AC compressor on your Honda Civic that saps maybe 5 horsepower. We are talking about a parasitic loss of 900 horsepower. That's right. Just to turn the blower fast enough to feed the engine, you're burning 900 horsepower worth of energy. That is more power than a modern Formula One car makes, just wasted just to run the air pump. And the only thing connecting that angry, violent crankshaft to that massive supercharger was a rubber belt, a reinforced, toothed rubber belt, basically an industrial timing belt on steroids. And here is where it gets really interesting. Armstrong had a hunch. He suspected that at 8,000 RPM, when that engine is screaming and the violence is shaking the fillings out of your teeth, that belt wasn't doing what it was supposed to. See, on paper, the math is simple. If the bottom pulley turns once, the top pulley turns X amount of times. It's a fixed ratio, mechanical linkage. But Armstrong knew that fixed is a relative term when you are dealing with these forces. He started doing some math that other mechanics ignored. He calculated that the belt was moving at over 150 feet per second. At that speed, the centrifugal force is trying to rip the belt off the pulley. It wants to expand, it wants to float. Now, you might be thinking, well, just tighten the belt, right? That's what everyone did. They cranked those tensioners down until they were literally snapping the snouts off the crankshafts. They were putting so much static tension on the system that the metal was failing before the car even launched. And yet, the data didn't add up. The boost numbers weren't matching the RPM. Somewhere between the crankshaft and the blower, horsepower was vanishing into thin air. Armstrong realized it was slip, not a burnout kind of slip where you see smoke. This was microslip, invisible to the naked eye. The belt was stretching, the teeth were deforming just a fraction of a millimeter, and the pulley was spinning slightly faster than the belt could keep up with. He calculated that the driven pulley was lagging behind by 10 to 12%. Think about that for a second. Imagine you are rowing a boat, and for every 10 strokes you take, one of them just misses the water completely. That is wasted energy. In Armstrong's case, that 12% slip meant that the blower was spinning slower than it should, which meant less air, which meant less fuel, which meant they were leaving 300 to 400 horsepower on the table, every single run. Most people would have looked at that and said, it is what it is, rubber stretches, physics is physics. But Armstrong had a secret weapon. It wasn't a degree from MIT, it was his resume. Before he was a racing god, he worked in industrial automation. He spent his time designing conveyor belt systems for factories, and in a factory, you can't have slip. If a conveyor belt slips in a bottling plant, the bottles smash into each other, the line jams, and the company loses millions. Precision is the currency of that world. So he remembered something from his days in the factory. He remembered looking at the pulleys they used for heavy industrial machinery. They didn't look like the pulleys on a race car. The race car pulleys were derived from automotive standards, standard 20-degree pressure angles, shallow teeth, designed for quiet operation and smooth engagement. They were polite. They were designed not to make noise. But industrial pulleys, they didn't care about noise. They cared about grip. They used a 14-degree pressure angle. The teeth were deeper, the engagement was aggressive. They were designed to lock in and never let go. Armstrong looked at the race car pulley, which was smooth and polished and aerodynamic, and then he looked at the mental image of those ugly, blocky industrial pulleys, and a light bulb went off. He realized the entire racing industry was using the wrong tool for the job. They were using a spoon to dig a trench because it felt nicer in the hand, when they should have been using a shovel. So he went to his personal machine shop. This is the part of the story I love because it's just so analog. No 3D printing, no CAD simulations running on a supercomputer. Just a guy in Louisiana late at night staring at a chunk of aluminum. He pulled out the machinery's handbook, the Bible of machining, and started looking up the specs for industrial timing belts. He didn't just copy them though. That would have been too easy and frankly too dangerous. An industrial conveyor belt moves heavy loads at consistent speeds. A top-fuel dragster goes from idle to 8,000 RPM in less time than it takes you to blink. The shock loads are cataclysmic. If he just put a factory pulley on there, the teeth would probably shear off instantly. He needed a hybrid. He needed to take the geometry of the industrial world and adapt it to the violence of the racing world. He spent 3 months cutting metal. Trial and error. He machined the pulley, put it on the test bench, and ran it. Prototype number 1? Failure. It chewed the belt up in seconds. Prototype number 5? It held grip but created so much heat the belt melted. This is the unglamorous reality of innovation. It's not a montage of successes. It's a montage of broken parts and expensive mistakes. Armstrong estimated he spent $30,000 of his own money on this. In 1992, that's the price of a nice house in some parts of the country. He destroyed dozens of belts. He blew up engines. Yes, actual engines. Because one time, he got the grip too good. The pulley grabbed the belt so hard, without any slip to act as a safety valve, that the blower oversped, sucked in too much air, leaned out the mixture, and boom! He literally embedded shrapnel in the walls of his shop. But that explosion told him something important. It told him he was right. The power was there. The engine had blown up because it made too much power, not because it was weak. He had found the faucet, and he had accidentally ripped the handle off. Now he just needed to figure out how to control the flow. He kept refining the design. He settled on a specific profile, Prototype 23. It had a 14.5-degree pressure angle, deeper valleys for the belt teeth to sit in, and a specific radius at the bottom of the tooth to match the belt's deformation under load. It was a masterpiece of machining. When he put it on the dyno, the results were terrifying. With standard pulleys, the engine was pushing 2,180 horsepower. That was a benchmark. That was a good day. With Armstrong's new Prototype 23 pulleys bolted on, same engine, same fuel, same blower, absolutely no other changes, the needle on the dyno swung past 2,180, past 2,300, and kept climbing until it settled at a staggering 2,510 horsepower. The room went silent. You have to understand, finding 10 horsepower in racing is a cause for celebration. Finding 50 is a miracle. Finding 330 horsepower just by changing a piece of aluminum? That's suspicious. The crew actually thought the dyno was broken. They shut it down, recalibrated the sensors, checked the load cell, and ran it again. 2,510 horsepower. It wasn't a glitch. It was a revolution. The belt temperature had dropped by 40 degrees, which was the smoking gun. That heat was energy that used to be wasted as friction. Now it was being turned into raw speed. But here is where things get complicated. You can't just dump an extra 300 horsepower into a race car and expect everything to be fine. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. If you aren't ready for it, it's going to knock you flat on your back. When they took the car to the track for the first private test session, it was a disaster. The first time Kenny Bernstein hit the throttle, the car didn't launch. It just smoked the tires instantly, hazed them all the way through first gear. It was violent and uncontrollable. The clutch setup, which they had spent years perfecting for 2,200 horsepower, was completely overwhelmed. See, a top fuel clutch is basically a controlled fuse. It's designed to slip just enough to get the car moving without spinning the tires, and then lock up gradually as a car gains speed. It's a delicate dance of centrifugal weights and timer systems. Armstrong's new pulleys threw that entire dance out the window. The engine was hitting the clutch so hard and so fast that the system couldn't cope. It took them 6 full test passes just to figure out how to harness the violence. They had to add weight to the clutch fingers, change the air gap, and completely rethink their launch strategy. But once they got it to hook, oh man, it was devastating. At the 1992 NHRA Summer Nationals, they unleashed it. The car was consistently running 2 to 3/100ths of a second quicker to the half-track mark. In a sport decided by thousandths of a second, 3/100ths is an eternity. It's the difference between winning by a nose and winning by a bus length. Now imagine being in the pits that weekend. You're a competitor. You see Bernstein's car running numbers that shouldn't be possible. You know they found something. You can hear it. The engine note was different, higher pitched, crisper. It screamed in a way that the other engines didn't. So what do? You go spying. This is the part of racing I absolutely love, the espionage. Crew chiefs would casually walk by Bernstein's pit area, sipping their coffee, trying to look bored, but their eyes were scanning everything. They looked at the headers. Did they change the pipe length? No. They looked at the injector hat. Is it a new aerodynamic design? No. They looked at the tires, the wing, the wheelie bar. They looked right at the pulleys. They stared right at the source of their misery, and they saw nothing. And this was Armstrong's true genius. He wasn't just an engineer, he was a magician. He knew that if he bolted a shiny, weird-looking pulley to the front of the engine, everyone would spot it in 5 seconds. So he camouflaged it. He had the custom pulleys anodized matte black. He bead blasted the surface to hide the machining marks. From 5 feet away, they looked exactly like the standard, off-the-shelf pulleys everyone else was running. He also implemented strict protocols for his crew. The pulleys were never, ever to be taken off the car when the pit ropes were down. If they needed to change a belt or swap a pulley, the car went inside the trailer and the doors were closed. It was black off stuff. When other crew chiefs, desperate and confused, would corner Armstrong and ask, "Dale, what did you do? How are you running those numbers in this heat?" Armstrong would just shrug. He'd give them a little half-truth. He'd say, "Oh, we really dialed in the clutch management this week," or "We found a better fuel mixture that burns a little cooler." And the competitors would run off and spend thousands of dollars chasing their tails, trying to replicate a clutch setup that wasn't the answer, while the real secret was spinning right in front of their faces. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't this illegal? Doesn't the NHRA have a rule book the size of a phone book? Yes, they do. And this is where it gets really interesting. The 1992 rulebook was incredibly specific. It told you exactly what material the engine block had to be. It told you the maximum diameter of the fuel lines. It told you how big the supercharger could be. But Armstrong had read that book cover to cover, and he noticed a gaping hole. There was not a single sentence, not one word about pulley tooth profiles. The rulebook assumed a pulley was just a pulley. It regulated the drive ratio, how fast you could spin the blower, but it didn't regulate the shape of the teeth driving it. As far as the NHRA was concerned, as long as it fit under the bodywork and didn't have moving parts inside it, it was legal. Armstrong didn't break the rules. He just operated in the empty white space between the paragraphs. For 6 months, they dominated. Bernstein's team won 7 national events. They were unstoppable. It was one of the most lopsided periods in the sport's history. Other teams were getting desperate. I mean, really desperate. There's a famous story about Big Daddy Don Garlits, the godfather of drag racing. He knew Armstrong had something. He could smell it. He supposedly walked up to Armstrong one day and offered him $50,000 cash right there on the spot just to tell him what the secret was. $50,000 in 1992. That's over $100,000 today, just for information. Armstrong politely declined. Another team, John Force's crew, tried a different angle. They proposed a technology-sharing partnership. Hey, let's pool our resources, share our data, make everyone faster. Armstrong just laughed. Why would he share the goose that was laying the golden eggs? He knew the value of what he had created, and he wasn't about to give it away for a pat on the back. But secrets in racing have a shelf life. You can only hide a physical part for so long before entropy takes over. And the way the secret finally leaked out is almost comical. It wasn't corporate espionage. It wasn't a disgruntled employee selling the plans. It was a photographer. It was the U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis, the biggest race of the year. The pits are crowded, media's everywhere. A photographer for National Dragster magazine was doing a technical feature on engine bays. He was taking high-resolution, close-up shots of the engines. He happened to snap a photo of Bernstein's engine at the exact right angle, with the sunlight hitting the front of the block just so. Later, in the darkroom, or maybe looking at the slides on a light table, he zoomed in, and he saw it. The shadows on the pulley teeth looked wrong. They were too deep. The angle was too steep. It didn't look like the automotive pulleys on every other car. He showed the photo to a veteran mechanic asking, "Hey, does this look weird to you?" The mechanic took one look and dropped his coffee. That's an industrial profile. Within 48 hours, the cat wasn't just out of the bag, it was running wild through the paddock. Every crew chief in the country was on the phone with industrial pulley manufacturers. I need a 14-degree pressure angle. I need deep tooth engagement. Get me whatever Armstrong has. But here's where the story takes a dark turn for the copycats. See, they knew what Armstrong had done, but they didn't understand how he had done it. They rushed to the machine shops and ordered industrial pulleys. They bolted them on their cars, expecting an instant 300 horsepower. Instead, they got chaos. Some teams lost power. Others shredded belts faster than before. One team reportedly saw their belt stretch so bad after one run that it looked like a piece of old chewing gum. Why? Because they missed the details. They missed the nuance. Armstrong hadn't just copied an industrial pulley, he had optimized it. He had spent 3 months finding the perfect root radius, the exact pitch, the specific clocking of the teeth. The copycats were using off-the-shelf industrial parts that weren't designed for 8,000 horsepower explosions. They were blindly applying a solution they didn't understand. And that is a dangerous game to play when you are sitting on top of a bomb. It took the rest of the field almost a full year to catch up to where Armstrong was on day one, and that year of dominance changed the trajectory of the sport forever. But here's the thing about engineering. It's a game of whack-a-mole. You solve one problem and you immediately create 3 new ones. And this is the part of the story that really shows you the brutal reality of high-performance engine building. Once the rest of the paddock finally figured out the pulley geometry and started making reliable power again, they ran into a new wall, a much more expensive wall. See, the belt slip had actually been acting as a fuse. It was a safety buffer. When the engine spiked in torque, the belt would slip a little, relieving the stress on the internal components. It was accidental traction control for the crankshaft. But with Armstrong's industrial-style pulleys, there was zero slip. The connection was locked. It was direct drive. So now, when the engine detonated 15 gallons of nitromethane, that shockwave had nowhere to go but straight down the connecting rods and into the crank. Suddenly, teams started snapping crankshafts like they were made of glass. Crank snouts were shearing off. Bearings were being spun. The harmonic vibrations, which used to be dampened by the slipping belt, were now traveling right through the block. This 300 horsepower gain triggered a mechanical domino effect that forced every single team to redesign their entire bottom end. They had to develop stronger alloys for the cranks. They had to redesign the oil pumps because the bearing loads were so high that the oil was literally being squeezed out of the journals. They needed higher pressure to keep the metal floating. the cost of racing skyrocketed. What started as a $2,000 pulley upgrade turned into a $100,000 engine development program for every team in the pits. And this is where the NHRA finally stepped in. By 1993, the sanctioning body looked at the chaos and decided they had to act. But, and this is key, they didn't ban the pulleys. They didn't say, "Nice try, Dale, go back to the old ones." They realized that you can't uninvent technology. You can't tell engineers to forget what they know. Instead, they updated the rulebook to standardize it. They wrote new specs that defined the allowable tooth profiles, the materials, and the surface finishes. They basically took Armstrong's secret intellectual property and made it the public standard. It was the ultimate compliment. The rulebook that Armstrong had outsmarted was rewritten to include his genius. Today, if you walk into a top fuel pit, you will see the great-grandchildren of those pulleys. The modern engines are making 11,000 horsepower. They are monsters that defy logic. But if you look closely at the blower drive, you will see that familiar, aggressive, industrial tooth profile. It's still there. The DNA of that Louisiana machine shop is spinning on every single car, on every single pass, 30 years later. So why does this story matter to us? Why am I telling you about a piece of aluminum from 1992? Because it breaks the biggest myth in car culture. We tend to think that speed costs money. We think that to go fast, you need the biggest budget, the fanciest shop, and the most expensive parts. And sure, money helps, but Dale Armstrong didn't beat the world with money. He beat them with perspective. He looked at a problem that everyone else had accepted as normal. Everyone else said, belt slip, that's just physics. Armstrong said, no, that's just bad engineering. He refused to accept the status quo. He was willing to look outside of his own industry, to look at conveyor belts in a bottling plant to find the answer for a race car. That is the definition of a sleeper mindset. It's not just about building a car that looks slow and goes fast. It's about thinking differently. It's about looking at the parts bin and seeing potential where others see junk. It's about realizing that the biggest gains often come from the smallest details. Armstrong passed away in 2014, and he took a lot of secrets with him. But in an interview years after he retired, someone asked him if he was angry that the secret got out, if he was mad that he didn't patent it and become a millionaire. He just laughed. He said that by the time a patent would have been approved, the racers would have stolen it anyway. That's just the nature of the beast. He said the real thrill wasn't the money. It was knowing, for those 6 glorious months in 1992, that he was the smartest guy in the room. It was watching the other crew chiefs scratching their heads, chasing ghosts, while his car was already packed up in the trailer with the trophy sitting on the dashboard. There is a lesson here for your own builds. Whether you are building a Turbo LS for the street, or restoring a vintage muscle car, or just trying to get your daily driver to run a little smoother. Stop looking at the catalog. Stop just buying the Stage 1 kit because the internet told you to. Look at the mechanical reality of what you're doing. Ask yourself, where is the waste? Where is the slip? What is the one thing everyone else is ignoring? Maybe it's your alignment. Maybe it's your tire pressure. Maybe it's the way your intercooler piping is routed. There is almost always a pulley hiding in your project. Something simple, something cheap, that is holding back your true potential. You just have to be willing to look for it. You have to be willing to be the one person in the room who asks, why do we do it this way? Top fuel racing today is a spectacle of brute force. It is violence on a scale that is hard to comprehend. But the next time you see those flames shooting out of the headers, and you feel that shockwave hit your chest, remember that some of that power, a significant chunk of it, isn't coming from the fuel. It's coming from the mind of a mechanic who decided to fix a pulley. And that, to me, is the coolest thing about cars. The machines are only as fast as the minds behind them. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the engineering history of the NHRA, do me a favor. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the single smartest hack or modification you have ever seen on a car? I want to hear about the zip tie fixes, the junkyard swaps, the things that shouldn't work but do. I read every single comment, and I might feature the best one in the next video. Also, if you want to see more content like this, where we don't just show you the cars, but we explain the why and the how, make sure you are subscribed to Legacy Motoring. We have some incredible stories coming up, including a look at the illegal suspension setup that got a WRC team banned for a year, and the story of the ghost fuel tank that won NASCAR races. You do not want to miss those. Thank you so much for watching. Keep wrenching, keep questioning the rules, and I will see you in the next one.